We are going to be talking about energy and shipping, charting a course to sustainable trade, and I have a great panel with me. You shall soon be discovering for yourselves. The organizers have imposed a carbon tax on our time. They've shaved it off by about 15–20%. But let us see, we like good developing nations are going to be a bit defiant on that. Uh, we are, talking about a shipping industry which is responsible for 3% of the global emissions, which is, if you think of it in terms of a country, would be something like amongst the top five, 6 countries in the world. That is where the shipping industry is today. It is a very hard to abate sector as far as emissions are concerned. IMO has been progressing, has been doing a lot of things, making a lot of announcements. They have now got short-term, medium-term, long-term goals. They've got a 2030 goal. They've got a 2040 goal. 2030 goal is 20%. 2040 goal is 70%. And 2050 carbon neutral, they get there. The question is, are they going to succeed? How are they going to succeed? How are these ambitions really going to match up, these expectations going to match up to reality? The other side of this is, we are in a world where supply chains are reconfiguring in various ways. They're reconfiguring because of geopolitics. They're reconfiguring because centers of demand are shifting. The global south is coming into its own. And in this mess, there are also a lot of new routes which you've been talking about through these conferences, new acronyms being thrown around, new seaways which are snaking their way around the world. Now, there's a lot of talk of resilience. Resilience sometimes has a cost. Now, what is that cost that we're going to be facing? So, with an industry which actually handles 80% of global trade, and 80% of global trade really means that yes, there can be pressure on it for sustainability, but the bottom line is that when billions of people are going to be dependent upon it for their lifeblood, it is really like the blood coursing through the veins of the body, of the human body. Now, if these goods and services and supplies are not going to reach, if these lines are not going to work, then what is the option? So that is a no-go solution. So that is where the real challenge comes, how to move ahead and do it sustainably. So I will quickly start with my panelists. Please, because time is short, add on to what the first has to say rather than repeat what they are saying. So let me start with you, Hannah. The Global Maritime Forum, you are part of the Zero Coalition. You have really been giving this thrust across in the world. Now, let me talk of the short term. 2030. The coalition, you have been pushing, you've been stressing, okay, 5% of zero emission fuels, maybe up to 10%, that is aspirational, by 2030. Actually, there are some people who say that as far as the shipping industry is concerned, it is not ambitious enough. My question is, where are we? Because the latest report which comes out says that every part of this machinery, which is supposed to plan and implement this goal, is quite off track. They're not going to get there. So what is your take?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. So we published an annual report, a progress report on where we are with regards to climate action in shipping. And the most recent one came out just over a month and a half ago. And it looks at our progress vis-a-vis this 5% uptake goal of zero emission fuels in shipping. And it indeed does conclude that we need to see a real shift in momentum in order to achieve the objective. One of the things that's underappreciated, I think, is the lead time to build new ships, to build new infrastructure, to build new energy supply chains that is needed in order to achieve that objective. And so the window of opportunity is really closing fast. So we need to hustle. But I think there's some good news as well in the analysis that we see, which is that there are first movers across the world that are forging ahead. And they're forging ahead in anticipation of others joining them on this journey. Some of the first movers are here on the panel with us today, so I look forward to hearing from them as well. And they're laying the tracks, but we need to really pick up speed in order to achieve the objective.
So there is a lead time. Surely this lead time should have been taken into consideration when these goals were set. There is a lead time. You say there will be a lead time. So what does that mean, that the lead time is not appropriate? There's more lead time required?
No, I think the lead time just means that we need to do many things at the same time, and that we can't wait and take consecutive actions. And I was interested in the discussion that took place just before lunch. There was a panel discussion on corridors, on shipping corridors, and it touched briefly on the notion of green shipping corridors, an area that we work quite a bit on. Effectively, we look at green shipping corridors as collaborative efforts to unlock early action on specific trade routes that have favorable conditions. And what we can see is that there are many, many of those kinds of initiatives underway. They're all collaborative initiatives. And even if only the most advanced of those initiatives, they manage to turn their intentions into action, to implement the green shipping corridor on that specific trade route, we can actually reach the 5% goal that we need. We can meet the target for 2030 with just those most advanced projects and initiatives. So I see there's definitely a path for us to succeed, but it really requires concerted effort, and we need to be firing on all pistons.
Thanks, Joanna. We'll come back with some more questions. Luke, let me pass this on to you. Port of Antwerp, is the heart of international trade. Port of Antwerp itself has declared fairly ambitious goals, hopes to become a completely circular economy system by 2050. And you also hope to become the hub for green hydrogen, not just green hydrogen, green ammonia. A lot of action seems to be on paper, but what has actually been happening on the ground? Where are we?
Thank you, and also thank you for inviting me to come to this wonderful event. Perhaps just the broader context very shortly. The Port of Antwerp is now the Port of Antwerp-Bruges. We merged with another Belgian port, not relevant for the discussion, although. The port is also hosting the largest chemical cluster in Europe. So we have a combination of the necessities for a port, for instance, to provide the fuels, old and new, but we also need to look on how we can decarbonize the industry. If you look at the European Green Deal, the targets set there, they are huge. And honestly, I think the energy side, greening the energy, is a tough one, but the more tough one is to decarbonize the industry. Steel, chemistry, cement, all these type of difficult to abate sectors. So we as port, we see ourselves not as a port, but as a port and an industrial complex. And that's why we are so convinced that we need to act. And I think ports, and I hope the colleague from Adani will join me in that, ports have to play a crucial role here. We think we understood that, and we started to work on this topic of becoming a port of the future. So what are we doing? We are working first on the supply side of the green molecules. But in a concept of what we call multi-fuel port. So today, the Port of Antwerp is one of the major bunkering ports for traditional fuels in the world, but we are also one of the major LNG bunkering ports already today. And this is thanks to our merger with the Port of Zeebrugge, which is one of the major import hubs for liquid natural gas into Europe. So LNG as an intermediate solution, and I know it's an intermediate solution because there are still carbon dioxide emissions along with it, but it's an intermediate solution. You see in the shipping world that still a lot of new builds are based on liquid natural gas. And then come the new fuels. So we have been experimenting in local production of green hydrogen, which is now supplying trucks, cars, and small ships. Also, and I want to mention this because we're very proud about that, we operate a tugboat fleet, and we are the first in the world to run a tugboat on green hydrogen and one on green methanol. So it's kind of experimenting, but we are learning a lot from this, and we see this as our role of front runner to also share what we learn with that to other ports. So the new fuels, hydrogen. Then we are talking about green methanol and green ammonia. Of course, being this chemical cluster, we are producing, and we are handling ammonia already today. Not green, but so the experience is there, the facilities are available, but we need to expand that. And that brings me to the second role. The supply side brings me to infrastructure and transport. As ports, we need to make sure that investments are done to either store and export or import and store, to have those facilities available. And it was mentioned in a previous panel, the energy density of the new molecules is much lower than oil and gas. So we will need much more storage facilities to receive these green molecules coming from overseas areas, hopefully also from India. Other thing on infrastructure is the transport. And there is where we look at pipelines. As Port, we have bought a company that operates 1,000 kilometers of pipeline in Belgium. Doesn't look that much, but for Belgium, it's a major player. We are adapting together with partners this complex of pipelines to be also usable for the new molecules, because we want to service also the industry in other parts of Europe with green molecules. So that's on the infrastructure side. And then the last point I want to mention, where we are really progressing quite well, it's on carbon capture, because we want to make it bi-directional, so importing the green molecules, but also exporting the carbon dioxide to the oil, gas, and oil fields. So investing there with partners in a liquefaction plant in the port is actually going on. So taking the carbon dioxide from the industry in the port, make it liquid and export it. So different initiatives are actually taking place to be part of this new transition.
Thanks. When we actually talk of the larger shipping industry, see, the shipping industry is on the demand side. When you start talking of fuels, green ammonia, hydrogen, LNG, it is on the demand side. It does not control what comes out of the well, what is going to be given to it. It is only raising a demand for it. Now my question, and this I would like to raise to our next speaker, which is from Antwerp moving to Adani, and talking about where are these fuels going to come from, how are they going to be cost effective, which are the fuels which are going to be most competitive in this new world which you're moving into, and how are we going to make this transition possible? What are your views? And speaking of the Global South, what is the Global South going to do in this role? Is it going to be lagging, or is it going to be leading in this?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I think this is India's moment. Shipping has to decarbonize. IMO has set a target of 2050, and it has to send the market signal for zero emission fuel. And it is deliberating on these matters, and that market signal is going to be fairly important. The concern are twofold. One is, as you said, where is the supply going to come from? Because when you look at the West, everyone will keep telling you that green ammonia and green hydrogen, the costs are too expensive. But it's like saying natural gas production in India is too expensive. An average cost is meaningless because different geographies in different forms of energy become more competitive. So far as the shipping fuel is concerned, yes, green methanol and green ammonia are a possibility. Green methanol, the only way to do it effectively is actually using biomass today, unless direct air capture comes down in price. It has some advantages. The capex upgrade for the ships is not as much as for ammonia. But in a way, and I have a sustainability officer's hat, every piece of biomass should be used for sustainable aviation fuel because there is no other solution for that. So let's look at green ammonia. Suppose the IMO came up with a 5% blending mandate for a zero emission fuel, and it was green ammonia. By some calculation, it will create a demand for around 35 million tons of green ammonia a year, say by 2030. That is almost 6 million tons of green hydrogen. that is around 120 gigawatt of renewables. So the important thing to understand that is a pure renewable energy play. And let me give you a simple example of how the cost structure for India are better than almost anywhere else in the world. The lowest tariff in India for solar is 2 rupees, or say between 2 to 2 and 2.5 rupees. That's between 25 to 30 US dollars per megawatt hour of electricity. Every company here, like Reliance, Adani, Renew, we are all trying to build electrolyzers, and there is no reason to believe that we will not be able to match Chinese prices for alkaline electrolyzer. There is no rocket science there. If you combine these two and did a simple homework, the cost of green ammonia production is already in the money. And another thing you have to understand that because of the fertilizer sector, India has more people than any other country on the planet that are skilled to handle ammonia. So Indian renewable energy companies will benefit very significantly from a IMO mandate for green fuels. And this is India's moment because it will help create the green ammonia market, and it will lead to energy security and eventually bring down the cost of green ammonia so India's fertilizer sector and others can also start decarbonizing in the future. So where is the problem? I do not think supply is the problem. Given the market signal, India and then Africa will come on board. They have similar conditions. But the challenge is that if in the initial stages, there is an increase in the cost of shipping, that needs to be addressed for the developing world. And the IMO plan is to tax and then use that tax to subsidize developing countries or provide a grace period when the cost comes further down. And this is how this industry will be created. And this is India's moment, and India needs to seize it and help our brothers and sisters in Africa to emulate this. And European Union has a role to play so that their RED III standards of green hydrogen are the ones that kickstart this economy. I have got absolutely no issue with blue, provided fugitive emissions upstream are taken into account. And some of the blue hydrogen that is bandied around, you might as well use gray hydrogen. Thank you.
Thanks. When you talk of the entire shipping industry, Selim, this is to Selim. When you talk of the shipping industry, we are really talking of emissions from the well to the wake. Keep emissions down the entire shipping chain low. Now the well, I mean, it's not really under your control. What is going to be coming out of there? You're only, as I said, a consumer of that. Wake, perhaps you have better control. Now IMO has a lot of regulations. It has come out a lot of guidelines as far as operational processes are concerned. The efficiency standards which have been put into place. The efficiency standards for new build ships, that's the energy efficiency standards, and the energy efficiency standards for, say, the existing fleet, which of course involves a lot of retrofitting and those kinds of problems. So how much attention actually is being focused on operational issues? And where are the problems? You see, this is more under the control of the industry. This is not going to come from outside. This is not going to come from the supply side. Please tell me about that.
First of all, I would like to thank this ORF for inviting me and to participate with you today. And I have the honor to be with my panelist team, and thanks for all audience for participating in this session. Shipping sector is very, very important for the world, as more than 85% of the world trade passes through the sea. And the shipping sector is responsible for 3% of global emission. Now the target for the IMO to reduce the emission from the shipping sector to be near from 0 by 2050. And the target to reduce the emission by 70% up to 80% by 2040. And for the short term, 2030, the target to reduce the emission by 20% up to 30% compared to the level of 2008. But how the IMO do the effort to reduce these emissions? For the short period, during the period of 2015 up to 2023, the IMO applied a lot of indicators in the shipping sector, like Energy Efficiency Design Index and the Ship Management Plan. And also last year, IMO applied CII, Carbon Intensity Index. So this is indicator lead the shipping sector toward adapting new technologies like scrubbers and make a big change in the fossil fuel used in the shipping sector. Now we can see LNG start to appear in the shipping sector to use as a fuel oil. And another point, we also in the order book nowadays for the shipping, we can see 50% of the order book of the fleet last months become toward alternative fuel, and by dominating with the LNG in this order book. But for the future, the IMO target to reduce emission more and more. So we need add another policies. I think these policies will discuss or apply the next 2027. And these two policies will focus on two components. First one, increase using alternative fuel in the shipping to reduce emission. And the second one, and I think it will be critical for developing countries, it will be carbon tax. It will apply 2027. So this is the main component IMO target in the next coming year to focus on the emission and decrease the emission from the shipping sector. Let me add another point about the waterways and the role of the waterways in reducing emission. And I will speak about the Suez Canal, how the Suez Canal play an vital role for supporting sustainability for the world. Suez Canal is very important for the world, not just for one country. It's very important for all countries. We can save more than approximately from 10% up to 90% from emission compare alternative route. For example, last year, Suez Canal saved for the world more than 55 million tons of CO2 compare alternative routes. And nowadays, as the disruption in the Red Sea, the number of vessels passes through Suez Canal decreased by more than 60%. So the global emission this year will increase more than 31 million tons. This costs the world more than $2 billion this year, and the world will need extra fuel for the shipping by more than 10 million tons of fuel. This cost more than $5 billion. This means that using the Suez Canal as a waterway save more emission for the world and support sustainability for the world. That is what I want to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Selim. Tawoon, my question to you is very simple. No, we are talking about an industry which has so many moving parts to it. You have the IMO, but we keep talking about the emissions of the shipping industry. If it were a nation, it is not a nation. It cannot make policy. It can give guidelines, it can lay down certain strictures, but when it comes down to the question of regulating industry as fragmented as a shipping industry, fragmented across nations, fragmented across jurisdictions, and down the entire chain, where we're talking of suppliers, we're talking of builders, there's a whole ecosystem out there. As a legal expert, my question to you is, what are the frameworks, what kind of frameworks we can think of, do they exist, whereby you can regulate an industry like this to start meeting some of the goals, the declared goals, which have been laid down?
Thank you for the question. Before answering to the question, because I'm the only lawyer among the speakers, I want to talk about one legal challenges relating to alternative fuels, which is the other speakers briefly mentioned. The current legal framework relating to the fuels is designed for the traditional and conventional fuels. So there are not much legal framework can be applicable to the alternative fuels like green ammonia. But there is a very interesting movement that global industry recently conducted a regulatory framework scoping exercise, which means they analyzed the existing IMO treaties and whether to what extent these treaties can be applicable to the new alternative fuels and whether there remain gaps. And this result was posted at the IMO website. And I think this is a great starting point to think about how to develop the regulations and standards for the new the alternative fuels. And also I want to raise the one issue that there are uncertainties relating to the potential risk of the alternative fuels on the marine environment or human welfare. So I would say that there is a need to develop the new regulation standards for the alternative fuels, but taking into account the potential risk on the marine environment and seafarers' welfare. And for the question that Josh asked me, I want to introduce a very interesting development from the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. The very historical advisory opinion was delivered by the ITLOS on May this year. And this is a very significant development because the tribunal confirms first the greenhouse gas constitutes pollution. And second, all the states must take all the necessary measures to tackle the climate change in order to preserve and protect marine environment. The ITLOS advisory opinion is not legally binding, but still it provides very important guidance for the states when they develop the national strategies or national legislation. And during the proceedings, IMO also submitted a written statement that how the UNCLOS provisions can be complemented and supplemented by the IMO relevant treaties and regulations. And then IMO also highlight that the current regulatory framework is consistent with the UNCLOS legal framework. So, and then because the climate change is very, very, very complicated issue. So it's very difficult to not only look at the shipping sector, but also need to look at in the broad picture of the marine environment as well. But I believe that this advisory opinion can provide very important motivation, not only states, but also shipping industry for the tackling climate change.
Thanks. Now, we've been talking in the first session, and I just have time for one more question to all of you, which I'm going to pose right across. And that question fundamentally is, there is a lot of regulation, cross-country, across the board regulation, like CBAM mechanisms coming up in Europe. There is talk of proposed carbon taxes, how to control embedded carbon. All these discussions are going on. And there is no unanimity on these. In fact, there's a lot of disagreement between nations on what should be done and what should not be done in this. Now, to all of you, my simple question is, from your perspective, from where you come from, where you're sitting, what is your, just those one or two recommendations for policy which you would like to see be placed in the sector, which makes progress possible, but at the same time makes it possible in a fashion which is equitable, which does not leave anyone behind? Let me start with you, Selim.
Thank you very much for this question. It's a very, very good question. As we know, there are a big difference between the developing countries and the developed countries.
Quick, just headlines
Yes.
to
So,
one or two recommendations.
Okay. So, to make a transition, an easy transition in the shipping sector from fossil fuel to alternative fuel. The cost will be very high on the developing countries. So first of all, developed countries should transfer technology to developing countries. Number two, developed countries should secure financing for alternative fuel and the new technology for developing countries. Another point, we would like to focus on cooperation between all parties in the shipping sector to a lot of effort. Together we can remove greenhouse gas from the shipping sector, and with together we can control climate change, and it will be good for us. Work together, work together, work together. Thank you.
Arun.
I think one of the most fundamental things that we can do is to create a trusted foundation for emissions calculation and measurement on which different countries will have different frameworks. There are rich countries that have contributed vastly to the GHG emissions, and they're willing to undertake measures which will cost them more, and that's perfectly fine. But let me take the example of CBAM. Of course, for developing countries, it is seen as a trade barrier in the guise of climate change. But if they go ahead and do it, then the emissions for anyone exporting from Africa, India, has to be actual emission, not country average. Similarly, when you're talking about blue and green, you look at actual emission, don't use a country average. The upstream emission in green hydrogen production is 1.2 kilogram of fugitive emission, and that is 25 times more deadly for the environment in the short term. And there are wells that have 10 times that. And so what we can do is figure out actual measurements. Norwegians have shown that it can be done. And then let different countries at different paces develop their own framework. But let us build a trusted architecture on which policies can be developed.
Thanks, Tawun. How do we build trust? How do we build trust?
Well, the trust happens because you are measuring everything, and then yes, you can bring in technology. But I don't want to, like 10 years ago, solution to every problem was blockchain. On the production process, on the logistics process, a layer of blockchain will go a long way. Maybe its time has come. And everyone talks about AI, but we may have to go back to a technology of the previous decade whose time has come.
Tawun, your take. Same question.
I think compliance of regulations would be the key in the context of decarbonization of shipping. And of course, as I told before, that the regulatory framework is not perfect to respond to the new challenges arising from the climate change, but still states should play a key role in the complying with the existing regulations. And if there is a gap, then they should use the IMO as a forum to facilitation of the discussion and exchange of knowledge and capacity building as well. So I believe that IMO can serve as a forum to develop the compliance mechanism, but still states and industry play an important role in this regard. Thank you.
So in our work at the Global Maritime Forum, we talk about the 3 A's to unlocking the uptake of scalable zero-emission fuels in shipping, and thus unlocking shipping's decarbonization. The first one is availability, the second one is affordability, and the third one is acceptability. Now, Arun assured us that availability will not be a problem. So India can supply all the fuels that we need for shipping that are hydrogen-based. Affordability, though, I think Arun did touch on a key point, which is that we need, especially in the early stages of the transition, We need to reduce the cost gap between our traditional fossil fuels and the new green fuels that need to find their way into the sector. And the IMO is critical here. Carbon price levy, another mechanism that reduces that cost gap at the IMO. But national governments can also play a key role, especially in the early stages of transition. National policy support for first movers can play a critical role to unlock the uptake of these fuels, and cost sharing in the value chain. We see ports around the world making schemes to preferential treatment for zero-emission ships. There are cargo owners that are willing to pay a surcharge. There are banks that are willing to provide favorable lending conditions. So all of these, there's lots of willingness in the supply chain to help reduce the cost gap in addition to the policy measures that we know are needed. And then finally, acceptability. And here, in particular, the global and local standards that are needed to make sure that the fuels can be used safely, and here in particular, a focus on seafarer education, training. I think it's encouraging to hear about the specific role that India could play because of the existing capabilities around use of ammonia. I think that's great. That's something we should learn from and apply that in the shipping sector.
Thanks. Luke.
First, on the ambition, I would like to say there is a pressure to lower our ambitions. Honestly, for our children and my grandchildren, please, let's keep the ambitions. The arrow will come down in the flight. So if we already lower our ambitions today, nothing will happen. So let's keep high ambitions. That would be number one for me. Number two, cooperation. Encourage cooperation. And when I look at the ports area, the whole decarbonization, the green fuels, the new fuels, it should not be a point of competition. We should work together and enhance the complete sector. So not one port fighting against the other, one player in the value chain fighting against another value chain. Let's cooperate on this so important issue of greening. And perhaps you allow me a third one, efficiency. I think we should, I know it's an open book, but the best energy is the energy we don't use. There is still a lot to do to reduce the use of energy. For instance, by digitalisation. And if you allow me, one example in ports. There is a lot of energy going lost because we don't have data on the next mode of transport of goods. Container arriving in a port, and we don't know at that very moment whether that container will go onto a barge to Germany or onto a truck to France. If we have all this information, which is available, of course, if we have it at the right moment, for instance, at the terminals, you can imagine what an optimization of the operations you can reach, having less emissions, less operations, less action. So efficiency in the energy use would be my third point of action.
So let me go to my final and last question for all of you. I'll start with you, Luke. There is a serious problem of capacity. Capacity meaning capacity of resources, capacity of human capacity to be able to handle the kind of regulatory frameworks, the pressures which come on various organizations, just the audits involved, the measurements involved, the reporting involved. There's a lot of reporting in all this. There's a lot of bureaucracy which has come into this whole system. Now, what kind of tools can be developed? What should be developed within the industry, within the organizations like the IMO, within industry players themselves, to be able to better handle this huge, humongous role which is going to be falling upon themselves? I'm talking of building capacity within the industry. Joanna.
I mean, I'm going to give you a self-serving answer. I think there's a lot of capacity. Well, look around this room. There's a tremendous amount of capacity. There's lots of capacity in the industry. I think the need, what we need much more of it, and Luke already touched on it, and I believe everyone also did as well, was around this notion of collaboration and working together to share knowledge. This is one thing that we see is the most beneficial in this phase of the transition, certainly, is that we can't sit on knowledge. We have to work together. We have to be willing to share what we know. We have to be willing to overcome sometimes our commercial fears, our fears around, can we trust the partners that we have and whatnot, in order to share the capacity that we have. So we can't sit in silos and work alone. We really have to share what we have and make sure that everybody brings their capacity to the table so that we can be on this journey and succeed together.
Which also means democratizing the shipbuilding industry and make sure that it does not remain concentrated in certain areas, passes on to other nations. Are we ready for that?
I think this also creates a great set of opportunities. As we move into this new world, where obviously a new set of regulations will come in, auditing, checking is going to be there. I don't think we should fear it, because often if you look at it, their new regulatory frameworks create a lot of jobs, especially for college-educated graduates. When post-global financial crisis, when Sarbanes-Oxley came in, the number of jobs of college-educated graduates was created was huge. But then things become better, and then some other regulatory framework picks up the slack. So I don't think we should necessarily be daunted by the fact that there will be a new regulatory regime. I have already said that what we need is a trust architecture, whether it is the ships, the logistics, the sources where the fuels are created, and if they all move to a blockchain, then there will be greater confidence in terms of where we are going. It's not going to happen overnight. It will take a decade, but we are talking even to deliver 5% of green ammonia, we are talking about half a decade to even get started. So I don't think we should be daunted by these challenges, but see them as opportunities. And if there was to be a blockchain architecture, that does create India's IT industry a great opportunity.
Selim, last question to you. You can answer this. But my question is over-regulation sometimes and constantly changing regulation creating distrust amongst investors, amongst financiers, amongst banks as to what is going to be viable in the next 10 years, next 20 years, next 30 years, when we start looking at long-term projects, long investments for the long term in creating capacity, say creating new shipbuilds, creating new kinds of engines, creating few engines for new kinds of fuels. Is there uncertainty there?
Now the target is very, very ambitious to decrease the emission from the shipping sector. And how we can to achieve this target? We need make a big change in the shipping building and the transfer to build a new vessels that use alternative fuel like LNG, green ammonia, green hydrogen, and something like that. But how we can do that? To do that, you need to secure finance to investment in this sector, and you would like a huge investment in the ports and to make the ports available to secure type of new fuel like green ammonia, green hydrogen, and something like that. And the financing now, because the high level of interest rate globally, so the developing countries will suffer from financing like that's a project. So I think the IMO should, in the next coming year, think how to develop a methodology or the tools to secure financing new projects and to transfer to developing countries and support these countries to can be available to produce this type of new vessels that work with alternative fuel. This is my opinion. We at the Suez Canal started already a new strategy focused on greenhouse gas emission and reduce greenhouse gas emission from our unit that support navigation through the Suez Canal. But we face two main problems. The first one, financing, how we can finance this new alternative equipment that work with a new fuel. And the second one is the know-how. The know-how of this type of alternative fuel not available in Egypt, and they would like to secure this type of new know-how to Egypt So we need a cooperation with the parties which have a good experience in this field. So we should secure finance, and the second one, transfer technology from developed countries to developing countries to secure
Thanks.
and use
Luke.
alternative fuel.
What is important is for governments to support the Green Deal they make with an industrial deal to make this catch-22 stop. So funding is a part of that, to give confidence to the industry, to close the gap in price between gray and green. And this should be something that slowly goes out. But to really start, to kickstart the whole thing better and to move faster, we need this industrial deal, including financial support to the industry to produce the molecules and to offtake the molecules. So there are mechanisms available, but we also need to use them, and we need to push the governments to continue doing that.
So given finance, given cooperation, and given collaboration across countries in this, it is going to be possible. It is a challenging task, but you all think we are going to make it possible by 2050. Yeah? Is that what the message is to the crowd? Thank you. I'm sorry, we don't have time for questions because our time has got cut short. We need to make up for the time which others took. But it's been a great discussion, so please give a round of applause to all our panelists.